Hey, Herman, it's Noah Groniger and Clint Schweitzer here with the Great American Sports Network, and just can't thank you enough for being on today.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Thank you. I know I was just talking to Chrissy, and she had mentioned that you guys be reaching out.
Well, this is a real pleasure to have you on, man. We're here in Kansas City, and the Chiefs are coming up to play the Detroit Lions here this weekend. So this should be a fun one, man. The Lions are undefeated. Chiefs are undefeated. This should be a fun game this weekend, shouldn't it?
I think it'll be a really good game. It's one where the Lions are sitting atop of their game. They've everybody likes to laugh around here because the Lions are undefeated, and this team has gone through some struggles. They didn't have a great preseason, but yet they figured out a way to get through the first part of the season and come out of it in really good shape.
Absolutely. You look at this offensive line, they haven't allowed a sack. The secondary with Darius Slay back there, I know he's kind of questionable, limited in practice this week with the hamstring, but hopefully he can get out there for the Lions' sake because he's their best corner out there and allows them to really do a lot of different things defensively when they have him and he can lock it down. So just talk about a little bit about this offensive line. They haven't allowed a sack, allowing Matt Stafford to stand tall in that pocket, confident, able to step into his throws, and of course we know he can sling it. And then this great secondary you guys have.
Well, with starting with Stafford and the offensive line, this is a unit that starting out even last year with Decker and some of the other people they had brought in, they thought that this would be one of the best offensive units in the NFL. And they had a couple hits and a couple of dings that took them out of that I think that mindset of thinking that they would be at the top. But then bounce back this year, there were some concerns with how would they handle the pressure, how are they handling when we saw in the preseason and we saw just there seemed to be some holes that needed to be filled, and they didn't seem like the line that we expected. But yet, what I've been really impressed with is the fact that with Matthew Stafford, I think his mobility and his ability to escape the pocket sometimes and step aside and make some throws has definitely improved the efficiency and the ability for that offensive line to keep him from having a lot of sacks. And when you look at Matthew Stafford and just how he's evolved over time, he went from just being known as a gunslinger to now a quarterback that I think you feel like you can trust. You feel like he's a guy that is more than just a big arm. He's a guy that's smart. He's one that can control the pocket. He's a leader on the offensive side of the ball. With that, he's got some competent weapons around him. He's got a competent running game in the backfield, and now he's got some tremendous talent on the edge, on the outside, in the tight end position. So this has become a very complete offense. The question was just going into the season, how would the defense perform? So it's a good deal on that side. You talk about the secondary and a guy like Darius Slay and their ability to be able to run some man coverage and take away the opponent's best offensive weapon in the passing game. He's been able to do that. Unfortunately, suffering last week a hamstring injury. He's kind of questionable. If they miss him, that's going to be a big deal going against the Chiefs' high explosive offense.
Well, let's talk about that. Of course, we like what we see from the Lions. Chiefs, on the other hand, wow, do they have some weapons on that side too coming in there. You see a guy like Demarcus Robinson emerging. Obviously, Tyreek Hill's not playing, but Sammy Watkins and Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, of course. Just talk about what you see just kind of, as an outsider of this Chiefs team. This offense has been, record-setting. Mahomes has done some things that are truly unbelievable. Just talk about what you've seen from the Kansas City Chiefs during Patrick Mahomes' first 2 years here at quarterback.
Well, I've seen a guy that I don't know if any of us expected to see him just explode as he's done. And after his first season, it's always about the follow-up. What would he do? He kind of caught everybody off guard. That was supposedly to be the big thing, but he's come back and shown that he's the real deal. This is a very cool, calm, and collected young player that finds a way to deliver the football, and he does it with such accuracy, which is tremendous. He's been great in the second quarter. He's got weapons. I know Hill's going to be out, but then you got Watkins that's come in and become a really big play receiver for him, and the tight end position has always been solid. Even you look at all the things that Kelce was able to do last year, and then you bring that in again this year. They're competent, they're efficient, but they're explosive. And this is one of those offenses that if you let this team get out ahead of you, and if you don't have the same firepower to be able to match that, that's when it becomes problematic. And I think that the saving grace for the Lions and what gives them basically an opportunity in this game is the fact that they're going against a Chiefs secondary and a Chiefs defense that I don't think matches what they put out on the field offensively. So that's why they have to score so much, is to kind of offset some of the plays that the defense gives up.
You kind of mentioned it there, how the Chiefs have a weak secondary. And Chiefs fans, I mean, they're braggadocious. They're feeling good about themselves. They've got the MVP. He's setting records again early on in this season, albeit 3 weeks. But he just looks like he is keeping this thing going. A lot of people talking about regression with him in his sophomore slump, a lot of people want to say. But in the Chiefs, they're coming in confident. Even their fans are coming in confident. They're talking a lot of trash. But they want to talk about these weapons on the Kansas City side. Let's go to the Detroit Lions side, and I think that's a storyline that's being kind of overlooked here. You've got T.J. Hawkinson, who's coming in and looks like he could be a candidate for Offensive Rookie of the Year. You've got Kenny Golladay. You've got Marvin Jones Jr., and out of the backfield, I mean, Kerryon Johnson. I mean, talk about this Lions offense and the potential that they have to explode on the Chiefs defense.
Well, you matched it, and that's why I talked about why the Lions have an opportunity here. Is I think they can match them with the firepower. You talk about Kerryon Johnson coming out of the backfield. I know they got Shady McCoy, and you have the ability to run the football. You also have a running back that can catch out of the backfield and Kerryon Johnson. So that matches what they have on the Kansas City Chiefs side. You look at quarterback to quarterback. I think you look at the mobility and you look at what Mahomes has done. Yes, he's definitely number one. He's for some reason, this guy has not had the slump that people expected. But you got the veteran in Matthew Stafford that can go out and deliver and still know that he has the ability to come back from any deficit. Then when you go on the outside and you start looking at the outside weapons in Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay, those are two big play receivers. They're guys that can stretch the field. They get chunk plays. Kenny Golladay has become very tough to defend one-on-one, so you got to know where he is and account for him. And if you're not doing that, then you put yourself in a position to get exposed. And Marvin Jones is the one who benefits from that quite a bit because teams forget that, this is a person you got to pay attention to. And regardless of the fact that they seem to spread the ball around, the tight end has become another matchup issue. Hawkinson is very tough to defend with just a linebacker. He overpowers safeties. He's become that proverbial matchup issue that defenses just really do not want to see, whether it be size or speed. And so right now I really give the advantage to the Lions, especially with Hill being out for the Chiefs. I see that the Lions, when it comes to the skill position on offense and then also just the offensive output, they could give them a run for their money.
Well, it's been since 1991, famously, of course, when your rookie year with the Detroit Lions, that this franchise has won a playoff game, Herman, and this is something that's just got to change. The culture has to change, and it looks like things are on the up and up. I mean, when you think about that playoff drought, and you looked at all the great players that have come through there and the great teams that you had, and looking into now, has it become something, in the Michigan area that it's like this has to change? Has it become something that's really brought the fans down to the point of, I'll believe it when I see it? Just kind of what's the fan temperament coming into this, and are fans kind of cautiously, embracing this team that looks like it could really do something special and get into the playoffs here?
The fans can hate this team. This team could have gone, and we've seen them where they go 0-16, but you know what? They're going to come back the next season. Very resilient fan base. It's one that has been here for this team through thick and thin, through some of the years where they were very hopeful. They were playoff bound to teams that the season was over after the fourth game of the season. The Lion fans will not go anywhere. They're going to be around. They're going to support this team. And being that where they are right now, anything that has been in the past, they're already drinking the Kool-Aid right now because they understand that this team is in a position, it's been here before. It had some great starts in the past that didn't materialize and didn't mount to championships. But it's better to be here with hope and expectation than to all of a sudden say same old Lions. And right now, the fans haven't given up on this team. I've been out of the league now for over, I think 15, 16 years. And I haven't seen it waver. I'm still sitting here supporting and cheering for the team to do well because I really want to see this town and this fan base that's been so loyal get the championship that the city and the state deserve. So no worries there. When the Chiefs come into town, they should be ready for a very energized crowd and one that is actually expecting the Lions to win.
Well, Herman, we've seen a lot of kind of failed Patriots coaches on the Bill Belichick coaching tree. We've seen Charlie Weiss, Romeo Crennel, Josh McDaniels, Matt Patricia. I mean, talk about him. His first year, a lot of people were thinking, well, maybe this is another one of those failed coaching trees off of Bill Belichick, but I don't know. We're looking at a 2-0-1 team. They're undefeated. It looks like they've kind of got an identity. They're believing in Matt Patricia, what he's selling them. Is this a coach that has staying power and can be that one coach off the Patriots, off the Belichick tree that has a lot of success in this league?
Well, this is a tough spot because of I would say it was somewhat of a disappointment last year. When you look at what I think the fan base thought they were going to get versus what even Coach Patricia probably had his expectations to, he'll tell you he doesn't feel that last season was indicative of what his ability is or his coaching staff or his players. This year they've made some changes. They've drafted. They've brought in some free agents, and they feel they have a better recipe and formula for success. The tricky part is this. That was season one. I think that's a forgiving year. You come into season two, and you're off to a great start. If there is a collapse that occurs, or if this team, after getting off to such a great start, doesn't make some inroads or, I think, get into the playoffs, I think there's going to be some buzz. I think there's going to be some talk and chatter there. So it's a double-edged sword where you want to have the improvement, but now that you have it early in the season, they got to be able to sustain it throughout the year. There are no guarantees. Players get hurt. Things change. Dynamics change. Other teams start to gain momentum. So we'll wait and see what happens. The season still has to be played out. I do know, however, this team is taking it one game at a time. That would be the message that any coach that's competent would give their players. Don't look beyond it. So I think right now everything is hinging on what happens next with Kansas City. As it relates to Coach Patricia, the team seems to have adapted to him, his culture, his style, and right now he seems to have that locker room.
Well, we're kind of switching gears here, Herman, because there are lots going on. It's a big weekend for you personally. I mean, let's look at this. The Virginia Cavaliers, the undefeated Virginia Cavaliers, are coming in to take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, a team that just gave Georgia all that they wanted here last weekend. How big is this for the Virginia Cavaliers? You know, a team that's kind of quietly flown under the radar to get to this point. Of course, the Chiefs have Juan Thornhill, a former safety, on our team now, and what an opportunity it is, though, to knock off the Irish this weekend. How proud of you of the Cavaliers are you as an alum right now, and just seeing this potential for maybe an upset this weekend? Maybe it wouldn't be an upset at all because Virginia is humming along, my friend.
Yep, I'm very excited about the team. I've had an opportunity over the last 3-4 years to get back quite a bit and watch a lot of their games. So during the season, whenever I have the ability and I'm not here with commitments in Michigan for the Lions, I get down and try and catch as many of the Cavalier games as possible. Coach Bronco Mendinghall has really, again, established a different culture that has not been there with this team. And it's not that the other coaches had a bad culture as much as he's had to have them buy into the philosophy that he brought from his previous stint. And the guys have really grasped that. And now when you go in, there's an expectation that comes along. And I think a lot of people don't realize this. He's doing it with a lot of younger players. He lost a big senior class last year, and this year he's playing with some younger players, but they're getting it done. When you look at just how great the quarterback has been performing to the running back, and then they got some really good players in the secondary and along the linebacker unit, this is a team that is creating some problems in the ACC for other teams to come in. Not many people expected them to be able to pull out the win against Miami. Against Miami and against Florida State. But this is a team that has played very well against Florida State. Looks like they were going to lose it at the end, but was able to hold on to a victory after it looked like they were dominating for a period of time. What I see from them when they go up against teams like Notre Dame is similar to what I see with the Lions. There's an expectation that the other teams are superior and they're going to walk over them. But what is missed is the resilience of these teams, the character of the players on both squads, both professionally and in the collegiate level. So I'm very proud to say right now, of the two places I've had my stay, both the University of Virginia and also with the Lions, I'm undefeated right now. So I can put on either the Lions uniform or their swag and feel good about it, or I can wear my Virginia Cavalier undefeated swag and feel very proud. So this has been the first time I think in a while I've been able to do that.
Well, Herman, kind of take us back because we're here in the Midwest and we cover the SEC a lot, with the Missouri Tigers and on and on. But tell us, for those that aren't familiar with the University of Virginia or a lot of the ACC schools, just talk about what it's like for you. I mean, you're playing in the ACC in Charlottesville. You had great teams. You under George Welsh, I believe, went to the Sugar Bowl your senior year. You were co-ACC champs as a junior, I believe. Ranking second in all-time receptions at the University of Virginia. So just kind of take us back to your career a little bit and, what it was like for you, what kind of the fan base is like down there, and just sort of your experience, being in Charlottesville for those 4 years, and just kind of what it was like for you, man.
It's a good deal. So when I first came in, a lot of people don't know this unless they are part of the ACC and they really follow my career with the Cavaliers. I originally signed a letter of intent for Virginia Tech, which is our in-state rival. And Coach Beamer and I became very close. I got to know him, followed his career, always cheered for him whenever we weren't playing. And I thought I was going to end up being a Hokie. And ultimately, they paired me up for one more visit to Virginia, and I was able to go and spend time with Sean Moore, who was a year ahead of me. And he toured me around and talked to me about how he was going to promise to throw me the football and all that. And I bought it. I bought in. I was pretty gullible, and was redshirted my first year, so I didn't get any passes. Plus, I don't even know if he started that year. I think Scott Sequels or one of those guys did. Mm-hmm. But the long and short was we ended up going to the All-American Bowl against BYU. We ended up winning that, and from then I was sold, not only on just the athletic side of it, but from an academic standpoint, the University of Virginia is top-notch. And I grew as a man and a young person there and understood what it meant to have character and do a lot. So there's a lot that I learned in terms of way of life lessons that transcended just sports. But the ACC in general has standards. It has a certain thing. It was known for the basketball. Everyone knows about ACC basketball, but the football programs have produced some tremendous professional players and just professional people. So it's a very good conference, very good community of schools that have high academic standards, but also now on the athletic side with the addition of some other teams like Miami and Florida State, and then you always had Clemson, who's been doing well since even when I was there. It just gives a certain reputation to the ACC that it's not a cakewalk.
We'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, you're a Virginia Cavalier. You've got Tony Bennett there. You guys win the national championship. They've been there before, and they finally break through. They get it done. Tony Bennett, Virginia, you're getting that basketball championship. What does that mean to you?
Oh, it meant a lot. I had an opportunity because everyone does their March Madness pool, and you get in on the tournament brackets and all that. And I picked Virginia all the way through, and I wasn't going to waver from there. And then I had to figure out, well, who would I get coming up on the other side? And that's why I struggled. And because I'm such a big Michigan State fan, I am here in Michigan, and I like Coach Izzo, and I like just a lot of my friends are Spartans. So I tried to pick those guys as far as they could go until they would actually meet the University of Virginia and Gonzaga. I thought about them as well as being a team that I thought would go a little bit further, but this was a team that each year for the last few years, they've been dominating the ACC. And it's been kind of under the radar. They've been nationally ranked all those years. But after getting knocked out last year with the lowest seed, believe me, I was in the airport with all my Virginia gear on, and people let me know what had happened to my Cavaliers. So it was a little embarrassing because I couldn't change clothes at that time because I checked my bags. But Coach Bennett has done a tremendous job. He's been consistent. People talked about how they were just such a defensive team. They had no scoring ability. They had to keep the games low. It was done by design, but yet the Cavaliers basketball team brought in guys that could shoot. They were lights out. They were smart players. They played a control style on purpose, but they also knew that if they had to ramp it up and put up some firepower, they could do that. So kudos to them. I was happy to hear the University of Virginia also won the Capital One trophy again. I think the second time in the last 3 or 4 years for top athletic program in the collegiate level in the nation. So the program, not just the basketball and even now with the football and some of the others, Virginia's been high with some of their national rankings with sports.
Well, you have a great career there at Virginia, and then you move on to the NFL, and it's the 1991 draft. It's not the spectacle it is today, but what were you hearing kind of leading up to the draft, other teams interested, and then kind of just take us through that day for you, sitting around, then you hear that you are the 10th pick to the Detroit Lions. You're going up there to Michigan. What were your thoughts and feelings about draft day?
Well, I thought it was going to be disastrous after I came out. Reggie Barrett, I think from UTEP El Paso, was the number one rated player who ultimately I think went to the third round or something like that, and he came same draft year with me to the Detroit Lions, and I didn't know where I was going to fall. You had guys like Jeff Graham, you had Randall Thrill Hill, you had forget the one guy that ended up going down to Atlanta that year as a wide receiver, Mike Pritchett, and so I didn't know where I was going to fall, but I did have an opportunity to go visit Coach Reed out in Denver, and they were thinking about myself or Mike Kroll, linebacker, with the 4th pick, I think, that year going to Denver. And that's where I thought, honestly, I was going to end up 4th pick overall because they had mentioned it was going to be either myself or him. And then when I heard them pick Mike Kroll, I didn't know where I was going to fall. I knew Detroit was coming up on the clock. They were looking at myself and Alvin Harper and some others. So I really had a pick that I was end up either in Detroit, or if I slipped there, I would fall to Dallas. And then the next one I knew, Miami and Marino on the board at the 21st pick or something like that. So so I had a really good. That year was, if I was ever going to be a wide receiver picked on many of those teams, whether you play with Elway in Denver, whether you play with Marino, in Miami, and then I think Troy Aikman was in Dallas, or it was going to be the four-headed, thing we had with Detroit, which was Andre Ware, Rodney Peete, Eric Kramer, and Chuck Long. So I ended up in Detroit. So that was my draft day. So sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, I didn't really care. I just wanted to know that it would be in the NFL, and then from there I'd take it from there.
Well, in 1991, you join an already tremendous receiving core, and you kind of have to work your way in. But this is the Lions team that a lot of people talk about. Of course, being 12-4, being the 2 seed in the NFC playoffs, ultimately winning a game against the Dallas Cowboys. Just talk about your rookie season, what that meant to you to be a part of this winning team. It was the first winning season in Detroit since 1983. And then to think, and what an unbelievable career you had after that, but to never be able to reach those heights again, if you go back to your rookie year and you think about that, is it like, wow, I can't imagine the fact that we'll never win another playoff game? I mean, just kind of take us through the mentality of that whole thing.
I really didn't know what to expect coming in as a young player, 21 years old. Going to a place that I only knew about their Thanksgiving Day games. I knew about a young upcoming talent, Barry Sanders, because I saw the special work he did when he was in college. I knew about some of the spectacular runs by Billy Sims, and that was pretty much it. And once I came in and I saw the success that we had in year one, ultimately winning the division, the NFC Central at the time, and then getting that bye, then playing Dallas and beating Dallas, I was like, holy crap, we're one game away from going to the Super Bowl. We just got to beat the Redskins. Well, the Redskins wasn't having it. They weren't having it. And they completely crushed us like they did the first game of the season, because we opened and we ended with them. Both were blowout games. They ultimately went on to be Super Bowl champions that year. But what it did give me was, and I think also the fan base, that this team, the Detroit Lions, was on the rise. But ultimately, Dallas Cowboys, who were one of the worst teams, I think, the year after that, somehow bounced back, made some changes, did some things, had a couple down years, but then ultimately went on to win Super Bowls. And we, on the other end, just kept going to the playoffs, I think 5 or 6 times in the 90s, but we never could win another playoff game. And if someone would have told me, you still wouldn't have had an opportunity as an organization to have won a playoff game even up to this point, I wouldn't have believed it. So it's disappointing. And I think there's enough talent that we can make an argument that for us, even in 1995, 7 straight wins, hottest team going into Philadelphia, that we would get blown out there in the first quarter and basically get sent home after making such a tremendous run. I wouldn't have believed it then either. So we missed some opportunities. We had some tremendous player and talent, but it's all about the total team effort. If you don't have that and you don't have some luck along the way, it's hard to win Super Bowls.
Yeah, and talk about some of that frustration, if you can, from the player's perspective, especially great players like yourself and Barry Sanders. Barry called it quits fairly early, I believe, after about 9 seasons. And just kind of go through that, talk about your guys' time and not being able to get over the hump, get it done, and the frustrations, whether it's growing in the locker room, and I'm sure you can feel it in the city and from the fans, and what that was like for all of you going through that.
With the Lion players back in the teams that we had back in the 90s, we had a lot of talent. We had some all-pro players. We had some Pro Bowlers. We had some very good players along the team. We had a spectacular return guy. You know, that's when special teams were special. Even before Devin Hester, we had Mel Gray. And Mel Gray was awesome. And defensively, we had the gritty throwback player like Chris Spillman. We had Benny Blades, who was basically a linebacker playing safety, and then we had some other guys up front that we could rotate in and out, whether it be Luther Ellis or Robert Porcher and Calvin Pritchett. We Jerry Ball up front. I mean, we had some really good players along the way, and then offensively with myself and Barry leading the league and being number one in our positions and making sure we were handling the passing and the receiving, and then we went through a lot of quarterbacks. I think it was 18 of them at some point.
Wow.
But Scott Mitchell, I thought, had a great year, a couple years out of his 3 years or 4 years he was there. And then we had perennial Pro Bowlers along the offensive line. You know, they talk about the Dallas Cowboy offensive line and the guys that were there, but we had Kevin Glover. We had Lomas Brown. Those are 2 Pro Bowlers. We had guys like Jeff Hardings, who came in and ultimately became a Pro Bowl player with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we had really good guys or even former All-Pro guys that came from other teams through free agency, but we could never seem to all be clicking at the same time. So there was some frustration, and then you look at a guy like Barry Sanders, you know, what player wouldn't want to have said, hey, I played with probably one of the greatest players ever. I mean, there's an argument that could be made, definitely from a running back standpoint. I think there's an argument to say he's best ever. One of the best players in the league ever, though. And there was so much that we learned from him and his work ethic and his leadership by doing, not talking, and just being a consummate professional in terms of how he handled his success. So there was a lot of character. There was a lot of leadership. I came in at a time where I was blessed to not have to be the one that they depended on because I was a high draft pick. So I was able to make my mistakes and learn along the way and just kind of grow over time. But altogether, it's just we never could seem to cross that threshold, and it seemed like it was never any stability that was taking place that would give us that long term, like you see with some of the coaches that have been with organizations for 8-10 years, and they're able to really mold it and to produce that type of result.
Well, you wind up shattering so many records, Detroit Lions team records, and accomplishing so much along the way. I mean, just as someone growing up in Kansas City as a Chiefs fan, watching what you guys were able to do, you and your receiving core and Barry Sanders, and it was always something that stood out to me. You, Johnny Morton, and all those guys like Herman Moore, you, and I just thought that receiving core stood out so much. It was something I always remembered. Brett Perriman, of course, and all you guys, and even though you achieved that early success as a rookie, you became the focal point very early in your career. So with you and Johnny and Brett, and just talk about you guys. You played together for so long. You played in Detroit for 11 years. What it was like, the camaraderie between those guys and that receiving core that was stuck together through 18 different quarterbacks and had to go through so much adversity. I mean, that's just a receiving core and guys that stayed around for a long time. I mean, that was pretty special, wasn't it?
It was. The one that really sticks out for a 7-year stretch. I only started. Most people will look at my career and says 12 years. Well, my first year I didn't play. I went on a 7-year stretch where I was a starter, the number one receiver for the Lions, and then the last 4 years where I barely played, or I was number 3, or whatever the case may be. But in that 7-year stretch, the players I played with and the offensive units that I was able to team up with were special. You talk about Brett Perriman, you talk about Johnny Morton. Playing with those two and having us as a trio, and then even Brett Perriman and I as a duo, and we still own the NFL record for receptions in a single season, the NFL record in yardage, I think, in a single season by a tandem. and then with Johnny Morton and I, and then Brett Perriman in the mix, and then you throw in tight end Dave Sloan, and then Barry Sanders in the backfield. Everyone talked about, if you go back and look at 1995, and this isn't to brag or be boastful, but they talked about the greatest show on turf. The greatest show on turf was the Detroit Lions. I mean, if you go look at us and you match us up across the board with what we did, and especially when they talk about it from a statistical standpoint, we hold our own, and we'll take that accolade. But at the end of the day, it's all about the championships. You can have all that cool stuff, and it looks shiny for you as an individual. But when you go out to see these guys and they got their Super Bowl rings on, even if it's a guy that never got in the game, it makes you realize what's left on the table if you never have the opportunity as a player to hit that apex of the team part of the NFL, which is the Super Bowl.
Well, I know Clint mentioned there just kind of some of your compadres there in the wide receiver group with Johnny Morton, Brett Perriman. I'm going to bring up a name that probably doesn't get brought up enough. His career was cut short by injuries. I always looked at him and thought he could have been kind of a baby Calvin Johnson, if you will. But this is Jermaine Crowell, a guy with speed, size, physicality. He kind of had it all, leaping out of the freaking stadium. This guy had it all. Looked like he could have been one of the greats. Looked like you were kind of taking him under your wing and teaching him everything you knew. And it was just so sad to see his career cut short by injuries. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on Jermaine Crowell, just kind of what a person he was and a player he was.
Jermaine Crowell was a very, very talented wide receiver. I knew of him prior to him being drafted by the Lions.
Yep,
I knew of him at the University of Virginia. He was breaking records there, and I knew of him as being a speed guy. He ran like a deer. And you talk about a lean, fast, 6'3" wide receiver that ran a 4.3. He was doing that back then. And then when he and I and Johnny Morton teamed up, it became a whole different dynamic and chemistry than even what Johnny, Brett, and I had, because I was the 6'4", 6'5" wide receiver. Brett Perriman was 5'11". Johnny Morton was 6 foot. But then all of a sudden you got me at 6'5", Jermaine Crowell at 6'3", and then you got Johnny Morton at 6 feet, and we became a tear. And when we were all able to all three take the field at one time, it was special. Jermaine Crowell had the hands. He was that guy that could go deep, and teams underestimated him by playing him one-on-one, but he beat you at the line of scrimmage, and that defensive back could never catch up. Unfortunately, his knees and injuries caught up to him very early in his career, and after a couple seasons, he was never able to really catch that fire that he had coming in. And I think the wear and tear from college, and then the wear and tear of the turf playing in the Silverdome, I think took its toll, and he was definitely a talent. I'm glad you actually brought him up, because he's one that a lot of people probably forget because he didn't have the long-term career or statistics, but one of the really good, talented players that had so much upside.
Absolutely. And another player I want to talk to you about, I don't think he gets his just due. He kind of went on to Pittsburgh back home and had a couple wins there on their Super Bowl run in 2006 that kind of allowed them to get in the playoffs. And, of course, I'm talking about your quarterback, Charlie Batch. I mean, this guy, tough as nails, he'd hang in the pocket. He hurt his ribs and was diving into the end zone, hurt him a little more, but he kept going out there. I mean, just a tough guy and just a great leader, and I just don't think he gets his due. I thought he was a great quarterback, and of course, we'll get into Marty Mornhinweg here in a little bit, but talk a little bit about Charlie Batch and the kind of quarterback he was for you guys.
Well, Charlie, when he came in, he's a young guy coming out of Eastern Michigan, and there wasn't a whole lot of expectation other than when they removed Scott Mitchell and they decided to replace him. They thought that the athleticism and the fact that Charlie was able to have a little bit more mobility in the pocket would give this team an opportunity to do more at that time. And Charlie took advantage of it. It was one of those classic right place, right time. You accept that opportunity that comes your way and you make the most out of it. And from there, he was able to go on to be a starter for the Lions for quite a few years before ultimately leaving and going over to Pittsburgh as a free agent, getting under the wings of a guy like Roethlisberger, and under a program and under an organization that was so committed to winning that I think it helped elevate him, and it caused him to have to raise the bar even from where he came from with the Lions. And that's not a knock on the Lions as much as it is different teams and different organizations that have had that championship flavor. They go at a whole different level. Their expectations aren't playoffs. Their expectations are championships or go home. And I think that mentality showed him that he could go in there and contribute. So when the opportunity came, he made the most of it, and it gave him a really long career. And that just goes to show, no matter even if you're a starter and then you got to go back to being a backup role, you can have a very long, illustrious career if you play your cards right. And I think he made the most out of all of his situations at both places.
Yeah, and going kind of on to 2000, you guys have a Sunday night football game, I believe it was October 19th, 2000, and you guys beat the Buccaneers 28-14. We all remember it for that big Corwin Brown hit on Keyshawn Johnson where he's getting up, kind of getting the grass off his face as his helmet pops off. But Paul McGuire said something interesting. He said he talked to you that week, and you talked about that 7-year stretch and that he didn't play much in that 4 years. He said that your feelings were hurt kind of through that time and not being utilized. You still felt, obviously, you had a lot left in the tank, and they weren't using you. That was Bobby Ross, and then it moved on to Gary Moeller. If you can talk a little bit about that, the Sunday night game, how you guys came out with the win, and your feelings being hurt in that time.
Well, yeah, and it's not so much as I would say than your feelings as much as it's a disrespect because you lose your position because you get injured. I'm coming off of a Pro Bowl year, and then to be put into a third position and not be given really the opportunity to get your position back was unheard of. Typically, a player gets hurt, and when they come back, you start at least back as a starter. But when I came back, I was the starter at number 3, which means I came in when they needed me. And it was a whole different mentality. It was a whole different thing. And I always felt that if you're not going to use me, let me go. And it's not a selfish, but you only get one time to have an NFL career. It cuts both ways. You know, teams want to get the most they can out of a player. A player wants to get the most they can get out of a career. And I don't think that's selfish. I think that's something that we deserve. Just like they deserve to have the best players out on the field, we deserve to have the best career. Absolutely. And waiting along that time, it hurts a player. And the hurt part is that you're talented enough to be contributing more than you can. I'm not a troublemaker. I'm a person that try and be of high character. I try and be a team player. But at the same time, I have a legacy I'm trying to lead as well. And when you're not given that, it's tough. And I don't bite my tongue about it. I don't circumvent it and talk around it. It is what it is. But no, I wasn't happy. But at the same time, I wanted our team to be successful. I wanted to do whatever my part was, so I tried to be the best 3 I could be. But statistically, and that's what's never going to show up on paper, if you're not given opportunities, you can't have stats. And so for my legacy in the long term, it gets hurt by that. So the only thing I can be judged by is when given the opportunity, what did I do with it? And I think my 7 years as a starter, I'll match those up against anyone in my era. And say, Absolutely. How did I perform and how did I combine, how did I work when given the chance versus here you are over here and you're just a role player. I can't be judged by that. But unfortunately, that's the way it is. We're lazy. We don't want to do the research and the homework sometimes to find out what happens. And so that's a sore spot with me. Make no excuses about it, but at the same time, I deserve better.
Oh, you definitely did. But go into that year, that 2000, Bobby Ross, you guys go 5-4, and then he steps away. Gary Moeller comes in. You guys go 4-3. Unfortunately, one of those 3 is at the last game of the season where you guys could get into the playoffs if you beat the Bears. Charlie Batch goes down. Stoney Case comes in. It doesn't go well for Mr. Case. Paul Edger hits a 54-yard field goal. You guys lose 23-20, and the season's over. And to be honest, Marty Morningwig comes in 2001, and a lot of that team's careers are either over or moving on because he kind of cleans house, and it doesn't go well with that regime either.
No, it wasn't. It was a tough year, and then to Coach Ross's defense, you know, he and we didn't get along great, and you look back in hindsight, I think a lot of us as players, we could probably handle the transition a little different because you're going from Wayne Fontes to Bobby Ross, and there seems to be a transition period of what he wants and expects versus what as leaders and veteran players that we've kind of gotten used to. And it wasn't necessarily we wanted things easier as much as you want to still utilize what you think you've learned along the way as experience. And so there was a little tug and pull about control over who you are and what you can do as a player and being the best you could be versus making sure you toe the line. That ultimately never worked, and so I think he lost the support of a lot of the players. Is there right and wrong on both sides? Yes. But at the same time, you have to make sure too that you're matching the right coach with the right temperament of your team. So there's things that you can talk about that all the way around. At the end of the day, when Coach Morningweg came in, or even when Coach Moeller came in, everyone liked Coach Moeller. I think he treated us like men, and he basically said, "You're accountable for what we do." He can't catch passes, he can't run ball, he can't make tackles, but he can put us in positions to win. Then you fast forward and you bring in Coach Morningweg and you bring in
Matt Millen.
Matt Millen, and all of a sudden, the wheels fall off the wagon and that doesn't last long because it's just a different dysfunctional piece that's taking place along that transition. And the way you bring in less experienced people, it seems like each time that are able to manage what you have, it just never seems to gel. And the Lions went through a decade of just disaster, trying to figure out how to get that thing back on track until Coach Caldwell came in, I think, and really start to change the culture and change just the mentality again, which he's not given enough credit for. And then now you have Coach Patricia, who's trying to now take it and move it to a different level of mentality based on his past winning experience. But you talk about the Morningweg era, and I'm not going to say he's a bad coach. I'm not going to get into the personal side of things with people, but it never materialized. It never worked, and it's unfortunate because you lose a lot of careers, a lot of players, a lot of trust by the fan base. The organization, I think, takes a hit on their armor, and all of a sudden now you got just things that are just not going well.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at that, and it sounded like, I talked to you a little bit kind of setting up this interview, how we've had Charlie Batch and Chris Claiborne on. They both told me that they were hoping that Gary Moeller would be carried over. Sounds like you had the same sentiments, that he treated you guys like men and held you guys accountable, and that's kind of what you needed at that time. And then they bring in Marty Morningweg, and he's taken Charlie Batch out for Ty Detmer, and then I believe it was Mike McMahon back as third string, and that didn't make sense. And just a lot of the moves they were making didn't make sense, and it was kind of a disaster year. A lot of guys' careers didn't hear a lot from Bryant Westbrook after that. I believe Terry Fair went on to the Rams. Chris Claiborne moved on, yourself, and so that was a tough year, I'm sure, for a lot of Lions fans to go through that with Matt Millen, Marty Morningweg making a lot of head-scratching decisions, and it was a shame because you felt like you guys were close after that 2000 season, almost making the playoffs. If maybe Charlie Batch doesn't get injured, you guys are probably in. And it seemed like you were moving in a good direction with Gary Moeller, and then Marty Morningweg comes off. And like you talk about, you have this big span, this big gap now between teams that look like you guys were on the brink, and now it's taken all this time now back with Matt Patricia that it looks like kind of you might be getting some footing back again.
Yeah, no doubt. Coach Moeller would have been the better fit. He already had gained the locker room. He gained the trust of the players. We knew what we had to do. It wasn't going to take bringing in a new coach, a whole system that was going to all of a sudden elevate us to a place. It just put us more into a position of confusion and starting over. And sometimes, you never know. That works sometimes, but what we found is that people don't understand, unless you're in the NFL and you're in the locker room, how much having camaraderie, chemistry, respect is important to the players. If you don't have it, you don't have a team. You have guys that just want to come in and get paychecks and go home, and it's not about the wins and losses. The fans may not want to hear that, but you got to be treated right. What person wants to stay at work and care about what that company does or how it performs if they're not being treated fairly and they're not being treated right? Money doesn't buy you respect. It's just part of the job. That should be given. That should be a part of it no matter what. But at the other side of it, there's a responsibility of the player to make sure they are people of character, that they have responsibility and accountability. And then there's a responsibility of the people who are leading them, whether it be upstairs or whether it be in the locker room, that they also are held to a certain standard of respect and accountability in the whole nine. And then the dollars are just what's being shared between the two for their efforts. That's all it is. So it cuts all kind of ways, and sometimes we overlook that when we hear about a coach being upset or we hear about a player being upset, that there's communication, and then there's also management of relationship that I think we're giving less and less time to, and we're thinking it's all about who's getting paid, and you're going to pay people and they're going to do what they're supposed to do. and you can be hands off. And it doesn't work that way. And it was starting back then, and now you can see how it's kind of the teams that do well, they're connected. The ones that don't, they're dysfunctional.
Yeah, absolutely. It can really kind of be stripped down to just that. And you look at it, and of course, the Patriots, obviously, they've had stability is a big one, of course. The Patriots have had it, and now the Chiefs have had it now with Andy Reid for a number of years. So, but I kind of wanted to get into kind of an amazing 3-year stretch that I just want to come out of your career and look at, because this is the 90s. This isn't just everything geared toward the offense. The defensive backs can't touch the receivers. You've got some great quarterbacks out there. It's kind of like 7-on-7, but in 95, you set the record for most catches in a season, 123. Of course, we know it was later broken by Marvin Harrison, but of course, he had Peyton Manning, a Hall of Fame quarterback, and just the rules geared towards the offense, like we talked about. But after that, you also had 106 catches and then 104 catches in 96 and 97, respectively. Talk about that 3-year stretch, just how that kind of gets overlooked. This is the 90s where they're physical with you, they're throwing you around, they're not getting flags, and coming up with those kind of numbers, and not with a Hall of Fame quarterback.
It's again, one of those careers of a player. You have to go back and look at it, and you got to pay attention to it to understand how do you get there. I don't think I played with any quarterback longer than a year and a half in a consistent part of my career. And during that time period, it was always, just trying to get one guy to be there during that 7-year stretch, even in the stay consistent. I know you mentioned the 3 years, but just trying to do that over 7 years. And communication and rapport is huge between receiver and quarterback, and even the offensive coordinator, because you learn the do's and don'ts. You understand your window and your range of that player, and I understand the good and bad about my quarterback. So there's things that you get to track over time and analyze, but the rule changes and the things that are back then, like I always tell people, could I catch 150 passes? Oh, yeah. No doubt. And I don't say that to be boastful, but it's just like it is. I mean, Atwater and John Lynch and Ronnie Lott, even though he's near the end of his career, or some of these blow you up safeties. I mean, you just didn't go over the middle. That was a place you didn't want to hang out. But you know what? As a big receiver, that's where I had to go. And the shorter guys, the smaller guys, did the deeper routes. And then I had maybe get some work in the red zone. But you had to earn your yards, man. You had to earn your keep. Ask Michael Irvin. Ask Jerry Rice. Ask Chris Carter. There's some big hits that you get in there. Versus now, it's about a lot of the one-on-one coverage. It's almost, I won't say it's 7-on-7. But there are some big hits, but sometimes it's misreads by the wide receivers, and then sometimes it's errant throws by the quarterback. But at the end of the day, I have no love, loss, or envy of the guys that are playing today. It's still football, and they're out there putting themselves on the line for it. But Marvin Harrison, got to know him, loved his craft. I really enjoyed when I look at even my Pro Bowl pictures and I see myself standing between or beside Chris Carter and Jerry Rice and Michael Irvin and the Reggie Whites and all those. You're at the apex of your career, and to be recognized and known amongst those guys is great. The last thing I'm waiting on is hopefully one day I get an opportunity to put on a gold jacket.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we would be pushing for that. You absolutely deserve it, especially like you said. It's easy to kind of overlook it, but when you go back and kind of delve into the numbers, it's kind of a no-brainer when you stack them up against other guys that are up for it and guys that have been in. You should definitely be in there. So we're hoping for you. We're pulling for you. But Herman, who's the best corner? Who's the one that gave you the most trouble? Of course, here in Kansas City, Dale Carter and James Hasty come to mind. You've got Deion Sanders, Rod Woodson, and Aeneas Williams, a guy like Sean Springs, perhaps. Who's the guy that gave you the most trouble out there on the island there at corner?
Well, I have to say a couple of real quick things. So, James and Dale, man, I have to make sure I apologize to those guys. I really, Dale Carter was a tough guy, man. I faced him when he was at Tennessee. Hard-nosed corner, lean, and didn't mind mixing it up. And with James, he was a safety that he patrolled in the back, too, and he was smart, and he was in the Pro Bowl for a reason. But even like Carnell Lake and Rod Woodson, so I faced some combination players and some guys, man, I forget about until we start getting into these type of conversations. But I'm gonna surprise you guys. So there's two guys that were tough. The first tough one was Donnell Wolford, who played out in Chicago, because I faced him at Clemson. So I kind of knew him, he knew me, we kind of knew one another, and that's always tough. So I had a tough go early on in my career when I faced them because we faced Chicago again twice a year.
Yeah.
So here we go. And the other one was Martin Mayhew, who came on to be GM here with the Lions, but I faced him so much in Tampa Bay, and it was only because Martin and I he was scrappy, and he would come after you, and he would get after you. But every time I would beat him on a double move, he would always grab me or tackle me or something like that. So pass interference, I'd have really, if you go back and look at my games, I'd have very low stats against Tampa, but we'd have big pass interference yardage. So I wish I could get those stats back, and maybe I go over 10,000 easy.
Absolutely.
And, maybe a lot more catches. But those were two of the toughest. But by far, facing guys like Darrell Green and Deion Sanders and Charles Rod Woodson out in Pittsburgh. I mean, just every week it seemed like you're facing some tough guys. You're facing Hall of Famers, and I wouldn't have it any other way because that's how you become great.
Yep.
Well, Herman, you shattered so many records for the Detroit Lions, and they held pat until a guy named Kelvin Johnson comes around, and he broke your record for career receptions as well as touchdowns. Just talk about him and kind of what an unbelievable freak athlete of a player that he was, and it's kind of strange because it's another guy like Barry Sanders that's career was kind of cut short, retiring early, kind of surprising people by doing so. But man, what a specimen he was! And if you're gonna, if your records are gonna get broken, that's not a bad guy to have up there, I guess, right?
With Calvin, it was good player, and when he first came in, and then became great. He's one that it's going to be tough to see another player his size, his speed, his athletic ability. That's going to come through the receiver rank and just dominate at a position. He was one that was a freak of nature. He was hard to defend. Not only did he bring size, he brought speed and power and athleticism and jumping ability. And with that, when your records get, like for myself, to see my records get broken, you know they're getting broken by truly a great player. So over there, it's always kudos to him, and got to know him on a decent basis when he was with the Lions. I was sad and disappointed, like many Lion fans, to see that he left early. But when the body says you got to go, you got to go. And then in his recent articles and all the stuff that came out about how he felt about the team and the organization, a lot of people are going to look at that and just say, man, he's going after this team. But there's a lot that happens behind the scenes with a lot of teams and organizations and players. And it's not that you place the blame one over the other and say it's the team or it's the player, as much as it's the nature of the game. Careers are at line. It's the last stop before your career is over as a professional player, as an organization and an owner. There's expectation. Yeah, these are your players. You're paying them a lot of money, but you're also looking for a return on investment because that's who puts bodies in the seats that help them thrive and become organizations or win championships. It's a nasty game. It's got some things that the fan base, if they knew that happens behind the scenes, may be turned off by it, or there may be some that expect it. So it's in this day and age, in this time, and now that we're exposed to so much more being uncovered that happens behind the scenes, this won't be the last that we hear of a player or an organization where things weren't rosy as they seem. But at the same time, I think it opens up another window to let you see kind of when you're evaluating players and you're evaluating teams and some things they have to deal with or some things players have to deal with. And hopefully it allows people to form their own opinion, but it gives them insight so that it's not done through ignorance or it's done through lack of knowledge.
Well, Herman, I can't tell you enough how much this has meant to us to have you on this long and to really go into things. It's just, thank you so much for the time. But before we let you go, we've got to hold your feet to the fire here. Chiefs and Lions are coming up on Sunday. We've got to get your predictions here. Who wins this game? What's the score going to be? And what can we expect here on Sunday in Detroit?
Well, I will say this. Big fan of Andy Reid. I've admired him as a coach and just watched his professionalism. He's had a tremendous career. I would cheer for him. He's one of my favorite coaches to watch. But I need to keep the value of my Detroit Lions jersey that they just released this year up. And also, I like the fact that our fans are happy, and that means a lot to me. So let's go Lions every day, all day. And I look for us to win by a field goal because Matt Prater's going to make it happen.
There you have it. We're going to hold you to that. Of course, we'll have to chirp back at you if it doesn't go that way, and if it does, we'll give you all the
give me
credit.
a call.
So,
You give me a call, and we'll talk about it.
Absolutely.
Herman, I can't tell you, this has been a true pleasure for us having you join us. This is unbelievable. You're just a tremendous ambassador to the University of Virginia, to the city of Detroit, to the Detroit Lions, and man, you're just outstanding, man. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Hey, it's been a pleasure, and you guys have been great to talk with, and see what happens. And don't forget, have me back, and let's talk about this again.
Let's do it.
Absolutely. We'll definitely do that. It was an absolute honor and a pleasure, absolute treat for us. Thank you so much, Herman, for joining us.
Pleasure. Take care, guys.
You too.